the book that I'm discussing this week is PEEPLAND, written by Christa Faust and Gary Phillips, with art by Andrea Camerini, colors by Marco Lesko, and letters by Comic Craft's Jimmy Battencourt. The publisher, Hard Case Crime / Titan Comic Book. So, several months ago now, right? Maybe even longer, when we talked with Charles Ardai about gun hunting. We learned more about his Hard Case Crime publishing company, and just the sheer volume of books, of prose and graphic novels that fall under this publisher. Stephen King, is one of those writers, but also Christa Faust.
Yep.
And so she's written some prose. She's written some novels for Hard Case Crime, but she also wrote a graphic novel called PEEPLAND. And he had mentioned it when we talked to him about it, and just talked about how great it was. And so when deciding to do, this book, a book for this week, I did this because something else we've got in mind as well, and I thought this would be a good time to talk about this book. And so I download on Hoopla. You get past the cover, you get past the page where it tells you, all the writers, and then you get the first actual page of the book. And I texted you, Nick, and I said, Jesus Christ, this book it's already got its foot on the gas, and it ain't fucking around, figuratively and literally. So synopsis. Times Square, 1986, the home of New York's red light district, where strip clubs, porno theaters, and petty crime prevails. When a chance encounter for Peep booth worker Roxy Bell leads to the brutal murder of a public access pornographer, the erotic performer and her punk rock ex-partner Nick Zero soon find themselves under fire from criminals, cops, and the city elite as they begin to untangle a complex web of corruption leading right to City Hall. Like the Naked City, there are 8 million stories, and this deuce, this is one of them.
Okay.
So, yeah, this was 5 issues, and it was perfect. It was a perfectly told story within that time frame. Because like extending it any longer, I think would have taken away from the story. Like the pacing and everything, we talk about that all the time. It's perfect. Like I started reading the first issue that night, Nicholas, and I finished it within, an hour and a half. It was just boom, flew right through them. So it reads fast, and it's so good. So
you love Christa Faust, man. Like, she's awesome, don't get me wrong, but you love Christa Faust. This is your third Christa Faust book on here, and either one of us could have done Hit Me if we called dibs on this show.
Right. So that's 4 books that, so like Bad Mother was great. That was one of the first AWA books I did. And then Redemption, which was great, and then Red Hit Me, did the review, the finale for that on Geeks Worldwide, and then this. And so, what makes Christa Faust very unique is that she writes some really badass, kick-ass female characters, right? And I think that's just that's her channeling something from herself. Christa, if you follow her on Twitter, if you follow her on Instagram, she's no bullshit, no nonsense, doesn't hide anything. She is, she'll tell you who she is, and she doesn't give 2 shits what you think about it, and she talks a lot about her past experiences, as a sex worker. And so like Hit Me and like this, I think, she's drawing, upon from personal experiences and from a world that not a lot of comic book writers, I think, can draw from. They sure can write about it, but having that, personal experience adds, something to these stories like Hit Me.
Sure.
And like PEEPLAND. And that's, I think, what I love about her too, is that there is no bullshit. There is no, there's no, it's like when, it's like reading Saga too, like Brian K. Vaughan, and same with Chip. Like when it comes to sexuality, there's no faux pas. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's like, it's just people and creatures being people and creatures, right? And nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to hide, right? And it's like, it's all out there, right? And so that's something that Christa does really well with all her characters. She's not afraid to go there, and it makes for really interesting, and kick-ass storytelling. So nothing is off limits, in this book, right? Again, no sugarcoating. It's just hard-hitting storytelling, that sucks you in. And this is a book that I was reading in bed with my wife next to me, and I was sort of like facing like so she could see the back of the iPad, right? Not because like right from the rip, there's just boobs, right? There's lots of nudity, there's talking about needing she calls for the janitor because they gotta wipe the skeet, off the booth,
Wow.
like
Wow.
it gets into the weeds, man, you know but there's also a lot of vicious violence. And so similar to Hit Me, right? There's the main character is also a sex worker working in the seedy underbelly. In this case, it's the 1980s, New York City. And with both stories, it's like there's a stumbling into a crime, right? It's not
Mhm.
like our main characters at first are part of some wild conspiracy or part of some sort, like they're the target of, or they're the person committing the crime. They just sort of happen to stumble into a situation because the nature of their work is going to lead them into seedy sort of situations. And so like they stumble on these crimes, and all of a sudden it becomes this sort of cat and mouse kind of game, right? it,
Mhm.
it kind of gives me that feeling of like those like mid 1990s like thrillers, where like there's the conspiracy where the politician or the person in power either has committed a crime or the family is something, and like someone like is a witness to it, and then like so it's like got that awesome sort of action feel to it. But this is dealing with the porno world of the dingy of dingy
Mhm.
New York City. And so basically what happens is this there's a character named Dirty Dicky, and he's a porn he's a porn director, and he's shooting some sort of amateur girl out out in public, and sort of photo bombing his shot is a crime, is a guy uh killing a woman in a sex act. It definitely seems like it wasn't a premeditated murder. It was just one of those things that happened. So now you get panel after panel, this guy just running around and getting chased, and he's got this videotape and he hides it in Roxy's booth, and she has the wherewithal. She says, yeah, I'm going to take this thing. I'm going to hide it even further. So then when the cops come looking for it, she's like, I couldn't tell you. It's just been nothing but jizz in here. I couldn't see anything. So it's like there's great humor in it. The story of itself, and so what Roxy and her ex-boyfriend get themselves involved in, and then the people around them by proxy get involved in, and just there's killing everywhere. It's noir, it's pulp, it's crime. It's absolutely fantastic. And so like one of the differences, where I would sort of, with this and Hit Me, is that there was definitely some moments in Hit Me that made me a little uneasy. I don't know if you finished that yet or have read,
Mhm.
read all the way through, but there
I
was
did. That was one I finished a while ago, and I forgot to mention in one of our catching ups. But yeah.
so in issue 4 with the hooks, that made me uneasy.
Mm.
That was a scene that was a couple of pages that made me go, like, okay, I was a little uneasy here. So like
Yep.
there's definitely themes, in this book that aren't always sort of easy to A as a writer write about, and B as a reader read, but it's dealing with the topic of AIDS comes up. You've got racial things that happen. There's a subplot between a cop and a black kid that happens in this book that unfortunately feels all too real, right?
Mm.
It is all too real, and so like, but it fits with the story, and it's a great little subplot that happens. And so there's this emotional roller coaster that you go on, not necessarily with the main plot but with the subplot, and the justice or the lack thereof that occurs, and then how she wraps this story up at the end. it's sort of like reading Sweet Tooth, right? Like when I talked about Sweet Tooth, it's like, man, there's never like a positive moment in this book, right? It's just a fucking downer. And like, just like when you think like there's going to be, it just kind of ends like, and you're just like, fuck, oh, that was so good. But like, it's not like, a great ending. It's a fitting ending for the story, but it's just like, oh man, like you're rooting for him at some point and you want a
Mm.
different outcome, but the outcome you get, you're just like, fuck, man, like it's so good, but fuck, like,
Yeah.
and to me that's just good storytelling,
Yeah.
and so you got a lot of different themes in here. It does push the boundaries. This is definitely like one of those comics where like, like you get to a certain point and you read and you go, you like you it's like when you're talking like, when you're at a comic shop and you're bragging about like how, like, oh well, these are the indie books I read. You throw this one out there, and I think you're going to get some street cred, because I don't think
Mm.
it's a really well known book, but it's like one
No.
you should read. Like if you're a fan of indie comics, I think this is a book you should read, because it's just it's everything we talk about indie comics being.
One thing when we talk about that too, like when we say if you're a fan of indie comics, and some people, if you ever encounter somebody who's just like, well, I don't really like indie comics, like they like just DC or Marvel pretty much, then I would like ask them like, well, do you want good stories? Like, 'cause if you want good stories, that's really what it is when you're a fan of indie comics. It's like the other two, you're living in maybe like you love the MCU, like reflecting on your childhood. Look, we like Marvel and DC stuff, but like
Yeah,
when I say like I'm an indie comic fan, or when you say that, I'm like, well, it just means you like good stories. Like that's what it is. You like stories that come to an end usually. Like I know Spawn's ongoing, and Invincible went on for a long time, and Walking Dead, but it's just like you want things that are gonna like that they have an end at some point. You know what I mean? That's the only difference. But they're like
right.
they're a good story first.
Right, we don't just watch comedies, right? Or we
Right.
don't just watch drama, right? We watch a whole wide range of things. And
Mhm.
Marvel and DC, they're great at what they do, but they do one particular thing. Their thing is superheroes, right? And
Mhm.
so comics are more than that. So when you get into
That's the
the
thing.
indies, right? You the avenues for stories are endless, and this is sort of like the epitome of that, because this is not a book that I would have heard of had we not talked with Charles or Die,
Mhm.
right? This, maybe I would have stumbled upon it, going through Christa Faust's bibliography,
Mm.
uh, but who
Yeah.
that's not
This
something we
dude.
typically do, right? You rip
No.
through bibliographies, right? So like, this is a book I think like you can like yeah, go read Peepland,
Mhm.
because chances are, like I could say go read Once and Future, and people are going to have heard of that more than not. Something is killing the children, right? More people than not will have probably heard of that. But go read Peepland. Like, oh yeah, what's that? You should describe it, and then give them the warning: don't read this around your kids or your
Yeah.
mom or your wife or anything like that.
Mhm.
And it reads quick. You're gonna love it. And again, like Marco Lesko,
Yeah,
this
I
guy
noticed
is
that. Yeah.
fucking brilliant as a colorist. Absolutely. He every book that he does, he sets the tone perfectly. Like with Chariot, again, we talked about the other when I talked about Let's Go. It's bright, it's neon. That's what that story called for. That was the vibe. Like it nailed it. This and same thing with Hit Me. Like you get that dinginess that you feel
Hmm.
like you're in, dirty, disgusting, underbelly of New York City in the 1980s,
Hmm.
and it's
It,
fantastic.
it's wild that we don't see more of Lesko, because we've like with the stuff that we've seen from him, it's like this is awesome. And like, yeah, I know there are like with colorists, it's different than like line artists, because like line artists you pretty much do one title, sometimes two, but it's very rare. Like that's why with Dan Moore is just like
Yeah,
on another level right now. Like he's just in some kind of zone. But with colorists, like we see them on like 2 3 titles. I feel like maybe even
yeah,
more than that. Jordy Blair's one we see get a ton of work, but Lesko,
yeah.
I mean, does some impressive stuff. And another example that you're bringing
Bond
up here
villain,
now.
right?
Yeah. Yep. Bond Villain's another one. Yep. Bond Villain's
Yep.
another one too. So I don't.
Hollingsworth, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
even Hollingsworth's kind of like just I feel like Hollingsworth's just a
just a
Murphy
Murphy
guy.
guy. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I don't know. Like I'm just it's surprising. I would think we'd see more of Lesko. Maybe we will. Who knows?
yeah, yeah. He's brilliant. So that's Peepland. Like again, this is not necessarily a feel good story, but it's
Yeah.
so good. And and if you're into if you're into boobies, Jeffrey McNamara, you might enjoy this one. You
Yeah,
know,
we actually learned recently. We haven't done a DSG book club in a while. That kind of died pretty quickly because a lot of the guys in the DSG don't know how to read. But
right?
we found out recently that Goo is learning how to read.
He
So,
is. He's
yep,
learning. Step by step.
yeah.
AEIOU.
So this might
You
be a
know,
good place to start, Goo.
long vowels, short vowels. He's getting there. He's getting.
Just don't let Rafi get his hands on this. That's all.
Okay, God, good grief.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's gonna bring. Actually, you know what? Before I trip into mine, Joe, with Peepland, I'm assuming because it's like a one-off thing. Like you would think it'd be more inclined for a movie, or could you see this like them taking this world and turning it into a show
No
somehow?
movie. Make it a movie. Make it a buck and a half, 2 hour movie. Like this could be dark and gritty, and just tell really good. Like movie is the perfect setting because a show it would be stretched out. You'd have to add stuff to it.
Mm,
Because like the crime, how it happens and how it gets solved and figured out, and then how it ends. Like no, boom,
okay.
hour and a half, 2 hours, be an excellent movie. Even if it was just like a Netflix movie or an Amazon Prime movie or HBO or whatever, right? Like
Hmm.
they could kill it and be awesome.
Okay. Well, I got to do a lot of reading on Christa Faust stuff because she's got a ton of awesome work. Hit Me is the one full one that I've read, but Bad Mother, Redemption, now Peepland.